The work of immigration attorneys is really critical. The rest of us can provide some support, but the legal expertise and the tenacity and the pro bono work frequently is what can make the difference in the lives of these families. So it's very important, and we all appreciate so much that Steffani Powell, immigration attorney who is part of Strengthening Sanctuaries, is here to talk to you about her experiences and her work. So help me welcome Steffani Powell.
I've been an immigration attorney for 26 years, but I've learned more about the policy of immigration, the American culture and opinion, and the importance of community during the past year and a half than I ever have before. I've learned that light can withstand darkness, and both darkness and light are necessary for us to engage with the experience of life. I've learned that the power of collective voices is monumental. And I've learned that the power of acting on our ideas can be metamorphic and momentous. I believe that in Olympia, members of this Strengthening Sanctuary group successfully combine their centers of energy and their centers of daring, if I can quote Robert F. Kennedy, into a furious, unstoppable current, and most definitely are on the path of creating a better community for all of us. I've learned from collaborating with Strengthening Sanctuary members that to effectuate positive and lasting change, first comes thought. Individually or collectively, we had thoughts about the election results and what would happen to our immigrant family members, our co-workers, our neighbors and friends. And then we organized those thoughts together into ideas and detailed plans, and finally transformed those plans into a reality, with the hope, in some cases the certainty, that our actions would have a positive impact on all members of the community. This beginning of this process, as observed, was our thoughts or our imagining of what kind of community we wanted to live in. We had imagined a community aligned with our moral values, a community that above all endeavored to respect the rights, the differences, and the dignity of others. There are community warriors in this group who daily acknowledge, honor, and defend these community values to ensure that change and development occur in accordance with these core principles. And why are they courageous? And why are they forced to be daring? Why are they energized about the immigration issue? Well, beyond the fact that they are kind and decent people, let's put this in perspective. Who are we as a state? We are 980,000 immigrants strong. 1 in 7 Washington state residents is an immigrant, and 1 in 8 residents is a native-born U.S. citizen with an immigrant-born parent. There are 350,000 people in Washington who live with at least one undocumented family member. We have 16,000 deferred action for childhood arrival recipients. And 1 in 6 workers in Washington is an immigrant, and these workers contribute billions in taxes, and as consumers add billions to the economy. While President Trump continues his very public fight for the construction of a physical wall, little by little he and his administration are quietly and very deliberately restricting and slowing the pace of legal immigration by building what we call in the immigration community an invisible wall. U.S. companies are facing unprecedented scrutiny on immigration applications for skilled workers, making it more difficult for businesses to hire and retain top talent from around the world to fill critical gaps in the U.S. workforce and who normally drive innovation. Close family members of U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents are being forced to remain separated for longer periods of time, and in some cases indefinitely, due to the president's travel bans and their extreme vetting initiatives. Humanitarian benefits and programs such as temporary protected status and deferred action for childhood arrivals are being eliminated or curtailed, meaning potentially hundreds of thousands of individuals who have lived in the United States for decades are in danger of removal, some to countries in turmoil and some to countries they have never known. The administration has also implemented policies that will undermine the independence of immigration judges and weaken due process in the court system. Immigration courts play a key role in affording non-citizens an opportunity to apply for benefits and remain in the United States. We must demand an immigration court system that is not controlled by political forces such as the Attorney General. And we now mark thank you, amen. And we now mark 3 months since this administration proudly announced its policy of ripping families apart at the border. We know that over 2,500 children were torn away from parents, and hundreds remain in custody to this day, lost in the system because of the administration's willful neglect. Thousands of people rose up to decry this practice, and as a result, it is no longer the official policy of the U.S. government. However, the trauma of what happened to these children endures. The trauma of what these parents faced endures. The recent spate of family separations is only one piece of a much larger enforcement and detention machinery that is tearing families apart both at the border and inside the United States. Although the administration has attempted to justify these policies as somehow necessary to protect national security in the U.S. workforce, all of that rationale falls flat because these policies are based on the false presumption that immigrants are dangerous and legal immigration is bad for our country, when in fact study after study shows the opposite. Immigration benefits our nation. Enforcement of our nation's immigration laws must be done in a smart, fair, just, and humane manner with full due process protections as required by our Constitution. Amen. The current enforcement efforts fall far short of these fundamental standards. The immigration enforcement actions currently being undertaken are not humane. They are not smart. It is unconscionable and indefensible to callously separate families or detain them indefinitely while they are seeking protection and permission to remain in the United States lawfully. Amen. Justice and reason can and should be restored to our immigration enforcement policies and practices now, not next month and not next year. However, this administration is far, far from restoring justice and reason. This administration continues to dismantle protections and buttresses its invisible wall daily. In this country, at this time in history, how are they getting away with this? Well, I believe they're getting away with this because they're hiding their racist and xenophobic policies and rapidly chipping away at civil rights behind voter apathy. If we don't care, if we don't shout, if we don't march, and if we don't vote, they will get away with so much more. Amen. The current administration has also very successfully commandeered the immigrant story. It has beaten, depleted, crushed, ravaged, and subverted the story. It has wrung out all color, love, hope, sacrifice, and struggle. It's erased the tenacity, the courage, and the devotedness of the characters in their story, and it has successfully vilified, it has dehumanized, and it has criminalized being immigrant. This administration is trying to make us believe a grim, desolate, and blighted story, handing us once again the same old tattered storybook filled with the distorted, falsified, and misleading characters and plot lines used by politicians for decades. This administration, the pundits, the far-right news sources, and those who follow bear false witness to the characters in their story. It is imperative that we take the immigrant story back. Amen. Amen. The immigrant story, it is not the story of animals, of rapists, of murderers, of welfare recipients, of job stealers, and tax evaders. It is not the story of people who need to be forced out and kept out by a wall. The true story is of sacrifice, endurance, fortitude, resolution, and devotedness to their cause and their families. The people who make it to our communities have traveled far, some having endured circumstances beyond our imaginations. Why should we listen and give credence to the hate and fear-filled rhetoric being spewed by this administration and its followers? Instead, we should feel humbled by what immigrants have endured and the courage they've shown. We should recognize and honor their power, their contributions, their stories, and their humanity. The only wall that should be built is a wall around hatred, willful ignorance, xenophobia, racism, and intolerance, and I'll support that wall any day. And what will our personal stories and our story as a community be around this issue? Do we want the story where we stand aside and let things fall as they may, where we throw our hands up in the air and say, what can we do about it? I don't think so. I know this community's story. We are about justice, we are about fairness, we are about respect and inclusivity, and we are about community resiliency. With every new hate-driven policy emerging from this administration, we must rededicate ourselves to speaking out and taking action. And members of this Strengthening Sanctuary group, members of this group are warriors speaking up and taking action. For the past year and a half, they have presented Know Your Rights presentations to immigrant groups around the region. They've educated school administrators, educators, and support staff about what their immigrant students are facing and how school policies and procedures might have a negative, unintended, harmful impact on these students and their families. They have worked with local congregations to discuss and plan a sanctuary site for an individual or a family in need. Members have worked with our legislators and testified in support of bills that would impact immigrant communities. They have worked with law enforcement to review and in some cases update policies and procedures that impact immigrants. And members have helped complete family safety plans and apply for passports for the U.S. citizen children of immigrants that might be deported. If a parent were to be deported and their child needed a passport so they could travel home to be with them. And they've pulled their personal resources to assist individuals and families harmed by this administration's deportation machine. A recent example, last month, Alejandra Hunt, where is Alejandra? She's back there. A round of applause for that woman. A recent example, last month, Alejandra Hunt, who works with me, and I had the honor of working with a woman from Guatemala who was detained in Washington after being separated from her young son at the border in Texas. He remained in detention in Texas. She was sent to the SeaTac Federal Detention Center and then moved to the Tacoma Detention Center where we met her. And I can guarantee that had this group not existed, what eventually was a positive outcome would have been something very, very different. On Monday, July 9th, I requested letters of support from this Strengthening Sanctuary community to file with this woman's bond request so that she could be released from detention and hopefully reunited with her son in Texas. By Thursday, 3 days later, I had 24 notarized letters of support. Close to 2,500 pledged as a monthly stipend. We had 3 offers of housing. 2 community members pledged airfare for purposes of reunification with her son. We had 7 additional letters offering education support, transportation, translation, and other support. In a highly unusual ruling, the judge granted her bond. And why was it unusual? Because these folks who wrote the letters were not close family members, right? A judge wants to see that connection because the individual is more likely to show up for a hearing if they have a family member sponsoring their bond and release, because that family member's bond money will be forfeited if the individual fails to appear for the hearing. But this community stepped up and they provided incredibly detailed and authentic letters of support, and the mother was released on a Wednesday and reunited with her son in Houston on Saturday morning. And maybe our first gathering down at the city council meeting when sanctuary city status was being discussed in late 2016 and early 2017 was fated to save one woman and her son Who knows? But had we not had this amazing community in place and ready to go at the very moment they received the ask from our office, I guarantee things would have turned out very differently for this woman and her son. Community resiliency. Our ability as a community to withstand, to fight, and recover from adverse situations. Situations such as what our immigrant communities made most vulnerable by this administration, and their family members, their neighbors, their employers, their supporters, and friends who love them are facing today. Our resiliency is reflected in our ability to do everything we can to avoid hanging our heads in despair and throwing up our arms in defeat as this administration continues down its hate-filled path. Our resiliency is reflected in our ability to seek the light in the darkness, to join our personal efforts with the ripples coming from the centers of energy and daring, creating a mighty and unstoppable current. When this government takes an aggressive step forward, crossing the line, we must not step back, we must not step aside, but rather we must link arms and take 2 confident leaps forward directly in their path. We must create an unbreachable wall protecting the members of our multi-ethnic, multiracial, and multi-religious communities. Our Attorney General, our Governor, some of our elected officials, and members of this incredible strengthening sanctuary group are thankfully holding that line every day. This is a fight. There's no doubt about that. This is a fight for justice, a fight for families, a fight for values, and a fight for our very identity as individuals, our identity as a community, and as a country. Amen. So here is to linking arms and leaping forward. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to all the strengthening sanctuary members. It's been a pleasure linking arms and leaping forward with you. So thank you to all of you all. We've got a lot of work to do, and we'll keep doing it.